The first time my daughter-in-law asked me about the old storage building on Miller Street, I almost laughed. Almost. She stood in my kitchen, holding a cup of coffee she had not touched for 20 minutes. "Dad," she said carefully, "do you know who owns that building?" I looked at her over the top of my newspaper. "Which building?" "The big storage place near the railroad tracks." I knew exactly which building she meant. It was mine. I had owned it for almost 17 years. But my son, Daniel, had no idea. Neither did his wife, Claire. And I had never planned to tell them. Not because I was ashamed of it. Not because it was some dirty secret. I simply believed that family should be built on love, not on the question of what someone owns. My wife, Margaret, had felt the same way before she passed away. "Promise me something," she told me during her final months. "Never let Daniel think his father is a walking bank account." I promised. That promise became more important than ever after Margaret died. Daniel was a good man. He worked hard, paid his bills, and tried to build a normal life with Claire. At least, that was what I believed. For years, I watched them struggle with money. I helped when I could. A car repair here, a medical bill there, a few $100s when Daniel's hours were cut. But I never told him about the storage building. The property had started as a small investment Margaret and I made when we were younger. Over the years, the neighborhood changed. New businesses appeared. Apartments went up. The railroad expanded. And suddenly, the little building we had bought for $86,000 was worth more than $1.2 million. I never mentioned that number to anyone in my family. Then one Tuesday morning, Claire asked me a question that changed everything. "Do you ever worry about what happens to your property when you're gone?" I lowered my newspaper. "What makes you ask that?" She smiled. It was a polite smile, but there was something behind it. "I'm just thinking about Daniel," she said. "He should know what his future looks like." That sentence stayed with me all day. That evening, Daniel called. "Dad, Claire said you might have some property." I closed my eyes. There it was. The first crack. Who told her that? She heard something from someone. Did she say what property? No. She just said you were keeping things from me. I was quiet. Daniel sighed. "Dad, if you own something, you can tell me. I'm not asking for money." "I know." "Then why won't you tell me?" "Because I knew my son. And because I was starting to wonder if his wife knew him as well as I did." The next morning, I drove to the storage building. I parked behind the office and walked through the rows of metal doors. Everything looked normal. Customers came and went. A delivery truck stopped at Unit 14. A young couple carried boxes into Unit 38. An old man sat in his pickup truck, counting coins before renting a unit. I had seen these people for years. To them, I was simply the quiet owner who sometimes checked the property. Then my manager, Harold, came rushing toward me. "Mr. Bennett, you need to see something." "What happened?" He handed me a folder. "This woman came here yesterday." "Who?" "Claire Bennett." My stomach tightened. "What did she want?" Harold looked uncomfortable. "She said she was your daughter-in-law. She wanted a copy of the property records." "Did you give them to her?" "No. I told her only the owner could authorize that." I nodded. Then Harold added something that made my blood run cold. "She also asked how much the building makes every month." I stared at him. "How much did you tell her?" "Nothing." "Good." Harold hesitated. "She also asked whether the property had a mortgage." I took the folder from his hands. Claire wasn't curious. She was investigating. But why? I drove home and sat in my garage for almost an hour. I thought about Daniel. I thought about Margaret. And I remembered something Margaret had said shortly before she died. "People don't always show you who they are when they need you," she whispered. "Sometimes they show you who they are when they think you can't say no." At the time, I thought she was talking about someone else. Now I wasn't so sure. That evening, Daniel and Claire came over for dinner. Claire acted completely normal. She brought a pie. She kissed my cheek. She even asked about my garden. But I noticed something. She kept looking around the house. Not at family photographs. Not at Margaret's paintings. At drawers. Cabinets. The small locked desk in my study. When Daniel went outside to take a phone call, Claire leaned toward me. "Dad, we really should talk." "About what?" "Your estate." I put down my fork. "You're asking about my estate during dinner?" "I'm trying to protect Daniel." "From what?" She paused. "From being left with nothing." I looked at her. "What makes you think he'll be left with nothing?" She smiled again. Because you never talk about money. I said nothing. Then she lowered her voice. Daniel told me you don't even have a proper will. That isn't your business. Her expression changed. For the first time, the polite mask slipped. It becomes my business when I'm married to your son. No, I said calmly. It becomes Daniel's business. She stared at me. Then Daniel walked back into the room. The smile returned instantly. That was when I knew. Something was very wrong. A week later, Daniel came to see me alone. He looked exhausted. Dad, Claire wants us to move. Move where? Closer to the city. Why? She says there are better opportunities. I nodded. What does that have to do with me? Daniel hesitated. She thinks you could help us buy a house. I leaned back. How much? About $420,000. I almost choked on my coffee. Daniel, that's not a small favor. I know. Can you afford the payments? Not comfortably. I looked at him. Do you want the house? He stared at the floor. I want my marriage to be okay. That answer hurt. Not because he asked me for help. Because he sounded afraid. Daniel, I said, if your marriage depends on me buying you a house, then you don't have a money problem. He looked up. You have a marriage problem. He didn't answer. That night, I made a decision. I would finally find out exactly what Claire was planning. I called my attorney, Susan Miller. Susan, I need you to check something. What? I want to know if anyone has tried to access information about my properties. She was quiet. Then she said, Are you worried about someone? Yes. Who? My daughter-in-law. Susan didn't ask another question. 3 days later, she called. You were right to be cautious. My heart sank. What did you find? Someone requested copies of your property records. Who? An attorney's office. Why? That is what I'm trying to determine. Then Susan said something even worse. They also requested information related to a potential refinance. Refinance? Yes. I sat down. Someone had been preparing paperwork involving my property. Without my permission. Susan continued. The request wasn't completed. But whoever submitted it had access to personal information about you. I knew exactly who had access. My son. And possibly his wife. I felt betrayed. But I wasn't angry at Daniel. Not yet. I needed proof. So I did something I never thought I would do. I changed the locks on the office. I moved the original deeds to my attorney's secure vault. And I instructed Harold not to discuss the property with anyone. Then I waited. The next move came faster than I expected. Claire called me on a Friday afternoon. Dad, we need to talk. About Daniel's future. He has a future. You know what I mean. I don't. She sighed. You can't take your money with you. I smiled sadly. Neither can you. There was silence. Then she said, You don't understand what Daniel deserves. What does he deserve? He deserves security. I looked through the window at the backyard. Security isn't something you inherit. You're being difficult. No, I'm being careful. Her voice became cold. Then don't blame me when Daniel finds out how little you care about him. She hung up. That evening, Daniel came to my house. He was angry. Dad, why did you tell Claire she wasn't getting anything? I never said that. She says you did. Did she tell you about the storage building? He froze. What storage building? I stared at him. She hadn't told him. That told me everything. Dad, I stood. Sit down. I took an old envelope from my desk. Inside was a photograph of Margaret and me standing in front of the storage building when we first bought it. Daniel looked at the picture. What is this? My property. His eyes widened. You own that? Yes. How much is it worth? About $1.2 million. He looked stunned. Then he looked angry. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to grow up believing my money was your money. He looked down. I never thought that. I know. Then why did you hide it? Because I wanted to know who loved you for you. Daniel was silent for a long time. Then he whispered, Claire knows. How? She found an old tax document. I nodded. Now you know why I'm concerned. Daniel looked at me. What has she been doing? I told him everything. The questions. The property records. The refinance inquiry. The request for financial documents. His face slowly changed. No. Yes. She wouldn't. Then ask her. Daniel left without saying another word. That night, I didn't sleep. At 9:40 p.m., my phone rang. It was Daniel. Dad. His voice sounded broken. What happened? I found something. What? I checked Claire's email. I didn't ask how. What did you find? An email from a real estate investor. My heart tightened. What did it say? Daniel breathed heavily. She was asking how quickly your storage building could be sold. I closed my eyes. There it was. The truth. Claire wasn't trying to protect Daniel. She was trying to gain control of my property. But Daniel wasn't finished. She also wrote that once you signed over power of attorney, everything would be easier. I felt sick. Did she mention why? Yes. He paused. She wants to pay off her debts. What debts? Credit cards. A private loan. Gambling. I was silent. Then Daniel whispered, Dad, she owes more than $180,000. Everything suddenly made sense. The house. The questions. The estate conversation. The storage building. She wasn't planning our family's future. She was trying to rescue herself. The next morning, I asked Daniel to bring Claire to my house. They arrived at 10. Claire walked in confidently. She looked at me, then at Daniel, then back at me. What is this about? I pointed to the chair. Sit down. She refused. I don't have time for games. Neither do I. I placed a folder on the table. Her face changed. Inside were copies of the property records, the refinance inquiry, the emails Susan had obtained legally, and the notes from Harold. Claire stared at the papers. Then she looked at Daniel. Where did you get those? Daniel answered. I found your emails. Her face went pale. You went through my private things? You were trying to sell my father's property. I was trying to help us. No, Daniel said. You were trying to help yourself. She started crying. But I had seen enough. Claire, I said quietly, you made one mistake. She looked at me. You thought I was hiding my property because I was weak. She said nothing. I was hiding it because I wanted to see what people would do when they thought I had nothing to offer. Daniel looked at her. And now we know. Claire begged him. She said she was scared. She said she had made mistakes. She said she could change. Daniel listened. Then he asked one question. If Dad didn't own that building, would you still want to be married to me? Claire didn't answer. That silence was louder than anything she could have said. Daniel took off his wedding ring. He placed it on the table. I think I have my answer. Claire started crying. She begged. But Daniel walked out. I followed him to the porch. He stood there for several minutes. Then he turned toward me. Dad, I'm sorry. For what? For not seeing it sooner. I put my hand on his shoulder. You were in love. That doesn't make me stupid. No. He looked at me. It makes you human. Months passed. The divorce was difficult. Claire tried to claim that she had only been acting out of financial pressure. But the documents told a different story. Daniel moved back into his old apartment for a while. He started rebuilding his life. I never gave him the $420,000 house. Instead, I helped him create a realistic budget. I taught him what Margaret had taught me about money. Save first. Spend carefully. Never confuse love with obligation. And most importantly, never let anyone convince you that their greed is your responsibility. One afternoon, Daniel came to the storage building. He stood beside me in the parking lot. So this is the famous secret. I laughed. Your mother would have hated how dramatic this became. He smiled. She would have said you were too stubborn. She would have been right. We walked through the property together. For the first time, I showed him everything. The offices, the maintenance room, the rental records, the old photograph of Margaret. Daniel stopped in front of it. She looks happy. She was. Were you? I looked around. At that time, I thought I was building a business. I touched the photograph. Now I realize I was building something I could leave behind. Daniel looked at me. Are you going to leave it to me? I smiled. Maybe. His eyebrows rose. But not because you're my son. He laughed. Then why? Because you've finally learned something more valuable than how much this building is worth. What? I looked him straight in the eye. That your worth has nothing to do with what I own. He nodded. Then he said something that I will never forget. Dad, I don't want your building. What do you want? I want to be the kind of man Mom thought I could become. For the first time in months, I felt peace. I had spent years worrying that keeping my property secret would create distance between my son and me. Instead, the secret had revealed the truth. Not about my money, about the people around it. And sometimes, that is the hardest lesson a parent can learn. The people who truly love you won't ask what they can get when you're gone. They'll ask how you're doing while you're still here. And that is exactly why I never told my son I owned a storage building, until his wife revealed her true motive. But there was one more thing I never told Daniel. The storage building was not the only thing Margaret and I had protected. A few weeks after Claire left, Susan called me again. "There is something you should see." She came to my house carrying a thin black folder. Inside was a document Margaret had prepared almost a year before she died. It wasn't a will. It was a letter. Susan had been instructed to give it to me only after a certain condition was met. I read the first line and immediately recognized Margaret's handwriting. "My dear Thomas, if you are reading this, then something has happened that made you question whether the people around our family love us for who we are or for what we can provide." I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking. Margaret had known. Not about Claire specifically, but she knew Daniel might someday marry someone who saw our family through the lens of money. The letter continued, "Don't punish our son for choosing badly. Help him understand why he chose badly." I wiped my eyes. That was Margaret. Even after death, she was still trying to protect our son. There was another instruction. She wanted the storage building placed into a family trust, but only after Daniel had learned to manage his own finances. I called Daniel that night. He came over. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly. When he finished, he didn't speak for almost a minute. She knew. She worried. Daniel folded the letter carefully. "Dad, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to. I thought losing my marriage was the worst thing that could happen. What do you think now?" He looked at his mother's handwriting. "I think losing the wrong marriage might have saved my life." That sentence stayed with me. A year later, Daniel started a small repair business. It wasn't glamorous. He didn't become rich overnight, but he was proud of it. He rented a small workshop and slowly built a customer base. Sometimes I helped him carry equipment. Sometimes he helped me at the storage building. We became closer than we had been in years. And I finally understood something. Money can create distance between parents and children when it becomes the center of every conversation. But money can also reveal character. It reveals who stays when the answer is no. It reveals who respects boundaries. It reveals who sees a person and who sees an opportunity. Claire had walked into my kitchen believing she had discovered a hidden fortune. What she actually discovered was a boundary she could not cross. And my son discovered something even more important. He discovered that love is not measured by what a parent leaves behind. It is measured by what a parent teaches before leaving. I still own the storage building. The old sign is still above the office. The railroad tracks still shake the windows when the evening freight train passes. Sometimes I stand outside and watch the lights move through the darkness. I think about Margaret. I think about Daniel. And I think about that day when Claire asked me what would happen to my property when I was gone. Back then, I thought she was asking about an inheritance. Now I know she was asking how much access she could get. There is a difference. And if there is one lesson I would leave with anyone listening to this story, it is simple. You don't owe everyone access to what you worked hard to build. You can love your children without handing them your bank account. You can help your family without becoming their financial safety net. And sometimes, keeping one thing private is not deception. Sometimes it is the only way to discover who people really are. As for Daniel, he still visits me every Sunday. He brings coffee. He complains about traffic. He tells me about his business. And sometimes we sit quietly in the kitchen, just like we did when his mother was alive. One Sunday, he looked at me and smiled. "Dad, yeah. Do you still have any secrets?" I laughed. "Of course." He shook his head. "I'm serious." "So am I." "What kind?" I looked toward the window. "The kind that don't hurt anyone." He smiled. "Fair enough." Then he stood up and hugged me. That was all I needed. Not a signature. Not an inheritance. Not $1 million property. Just my son standing in my kitchen because he wanted to be there. And that was worth more than the storage building ever was.